Okay, g'day everyone. Welcome back to Kieran's Training. So tonight we're going to have a bit of a chat. I want to start talking about VOCs. So what they are, do you need one? Are they any good? What's the purpose behind them? So we're going to cover off a little bit of what's covered in VOCs. Now, even though we're talking about that, if you do have any questions about anything else to do with the high-risk licensing or anything along those lines, just jump on board and put a question up and we'll get back to you. Alright, so VOCs, first up, what are they? So a VOC is a verification of competency. Now, the verification of competency, it's there to make sure that you're actually competent in what you're doing. Now, what I found over the years is just because somebody has a license, that doesn't make them competent in what they're doing. And the only thing that gives you competence in what you're doing is actually time under the hook or time in the seat, depending on what your role is. All right, so now VOCs, they are a good thing, but the problem is the way they're handled in a lot of cases, it leaves a lot to be desired. Now, the best thing with a VOC, it should be task specific to what your job actually entails. So to give you an example, I've done VOCs for a major company, national company, and they have a VOC across the board for all their sites. Now, the problem with this is, with the verification of competency, they're coming in and I've got to verify them as being competent. Now, the problem with that is where they get their questions from doesn't necessarily relate to the task they're doing. So, for example, this company I'm thinking about, one of their questions on there is what is the maximum temperature that a flexible steel wire rope can be used in? Now, I will guarantee you, maybe one or two of you out there might know the answer, but very few of you do. Now, realistically, if someone came in to do a VOC and they got the question wrong, then they essentially failed the VOC. Now, nobody is actually going to know the answer to that, realistically. Okay, so if you do know the answer, jot it down and I'll tell you whether you're right or not. Okay, now, where I was doing the VOCs for, they're a refinery, and basically what they're doing is they move a lot of pipes, none of them high temperature pipes, but they install pipes, they do flanges, swing blanks, okay, they do all that sort of work. Now, knowing the maximum temperature of flexible steel wire rope has absolutely nothing to do with the task they're doing. Okay, now another thing is a VOC needs to be machine specific. Now, I've had a couple of occasions where I've been delivering a crane course, C6 for example, and the student has said, oh, my employer wants me to get a VOC as well at the same time. Now, I could give you a VOC for the machine that we used for the course, but that is not going to cover all C6 cranes. So if we were to do the course in a Terex, doesn't mean you know how to drive a Liebherr. So if you're doing a VOC for a machine, it actually needs to be machine specific. All right. Now, if it's not machine specific, the employer doesn't know whether or not you know how to drive that particular machine. Now, if an employer is saying to you, and I have had employers say this as well, oh, we just need a VOC because our paperwork says they need to have a VOC. I can think of one example, where there was a company just put one of their people through a C6 course, and that's because there wasn't a CN course available for him at the time because he was going to be driving a Frenner. So they asked if once he completed the C6 course, if I could then do a VOC for the C6 because that covers the Frenner. Well, no, it doesn't. The VOC isn't a license. It's just evidence that you know how to drive a particular machine. All right. So if someone tries to tell you that you need to get a VOC for a particular class of crane or for a particular boom lift or a particular forklift. All right, remember, it has to be machine specific. Just because you know how to drive one, it doesn't mean you know how to drive all of them. Now I've driven a lot of different cranes over the years, but there is no way that I'm ever going to tell you that I know how to drive every crane. They are all different. You throw me in a DMAG, and look, I've driven a couple over the years, but they're not my forte, and I would need a refresher. Now, when you hire somebody, you can't just expect them to know your machines you've got on there. You have to actually give them training on that machine before you send them off to do a VOC. Right? You can't just expect everyone to know every machine that's out there, right? Unless, of course, they already said they've driven that machine. Okay, so I hope that clears that up a little bit. So just remember, when you're doing a VOC, it needs to be task specific for the task they're doing. So, because you've got to remember, especially when you look at rigging, there's that many different sides of rigging. You could be rigging doing tilt panels, you could be rigging doing steel structures, you could be doing entertainment rigging, you could be rigging in a refinery doing pipe work, all right? It's all completely different. So if you're going to have to do a VOC, you want that VOC specified for the type of work you're doing. So if you're going to be working in a refinery to do pipe work, it's no real advantage getting you to do tilt panels in order to prove your verification of competency, because it has no reflection on the tasks that you're doing. Okay, so that's one of my big bugbears. And look, the other thing you've got to remember too is when you're doing VOCs, and I've come across this way too often, is the people actually delivering the VOCs don't actually know the equipment themselves. They're just trying to stand back and see that they tell you to boom up and you boom up. Well, anyone can do that. That doesn't tell you you know how to operate the machine. So, look, the best form of VOCs are the ones that are typically done in-house, I believe. So, if they're done in-house by someone who typically drives that machine, and then they can VOC someone else who's coming into it. All right. Now, the Crane Industry Council, they've got a great program with the CrewSafe, where it is peer-to-peer VOCs, and they keep a record of that. You get some video evidence and you get some questions, etc. So that's a great form of doing it as well. In-house ones are a great way of doing it as well. If you are going to run your own VOCs and your own paperwork and use an external provider, it's always best if you can get that external provider to narrow the VOC down to the tasks that they are actually going to be doing on your site. All right? Otherwise, you're just wasting everybody's time and you're not actually proving they're competent to do the jobs that they're doing. Okay, I hope that makes sense to everybody. All right, and I'm hoping that this is actually working. All right. Okay. Yep, okay. I'm just making sure it's all working. I just didn't see it coming up on here. All right. Better turn that down. I don't want to listen to myself in the background. All right. So, like I said, VOCs, they're a great thing, and you do need to make sure that you know how to drive something before you're given into it. But you got to make sure they're done right. You can't just jump into any machine and say that covers everything. Okay, all right, thanks Shane. I just sort of figured that out when I heard myself talking in the background. Okay, so, and that's one of my biggest issues is, like, it's not just the VOCs themselves, but also a lot of times the people that are actually conducting the VOCs. The problem with external providers is you're not necessarily getting somebody who knows that particular machine you're doing or what tasks you're doing. Whereas in-house, peer-to-peer is probably the better way to go, because at least that way you've got somebody who knows how to operate that machine, passing it on to the new bloke. Okay, you're a tower op as well. Yes, I do drive tower. Well, I'd say I have driven a couple of tower cranes. By no means am I a tower crane expert. My background is more typically in the crawlers and the oil cans, right, and a fair bit under the hook with the rigging side as well. Yes, I do have a tower crane ticket, but not a great expert in tower cranes. All right, to be honest with you, they don't really appeal to me, being stuck on the same site all the time. All right. Okay, but if you do have any questions about them, I can certainly try my best to help you if I can. If not, perhaps somebody else online may be able to answer it for us. All right. Okay. So the other thing about VOCs is, so I'll take, for example, when I was up at Nelson Point, I actually had 26 different VOCs at the time for, I think it was 22 different machines, plus your dogging and your rigging, basic and intermediate rigging, etc., etc. And now those VOCs, they last for 2 years. Now, even if you were driving the exact same machine for 2 years straight, I was in different machines obviously, but even if you were, they still wanted a VOC done on that machine as well. Now, when I say they should be machine specific, look, there could always be some exceptions to that. So, for example, if you jumped from a 200-ton lever to a 250-ton lever with the same computer system in them, they're pretty much identical cranes. It's just a little bit bigger. So there could be some exceptions there. But obviously, if you jump from an older lever into a newer lever, you'll need to get a bit of training on that. Now, you shouldn't just be sending people to get the VOCs prior to having a little bit of training on that equipment first. Okay. So, in-house type, specific VOC on the crane, difference for the type required. Aviation is big on it for aircraft types. I would certainly hope that aviation are big on it for aircraft. They should definitely be machine specific. I would hate to think the pilot hadn't driven that plane before. I'd like to think that he's had some sort of training and been verified on it. Because look, even the very setup of the different cranes, it can be different as well. So, for example, if you're in a Liebherr or Grove, as soon as you pull up, you drop the suspension, you lock the suspension, as opposed to if you're in a Terex or a Fawn, where you'll throw your outrigs out, set it up, and then suck your suspension up. So they can be completely different. All right, so it's good to be trained on all the different machines as well. All right, and not just the machines, but also things. If you're going to be using the fly, make sure you know how to use the fly as well. All right, it was actually only the other day. So we were looking at maybe needing to use the fly, and I actually asked, can I get a video so I can do a training video on it? And he said, that's fine, so long as you can help me put the fly out, because I haven't actually put it out on this machine for about 3 years. Which is probably not ideal. If you knew you were going to go to a job where the fly was to be put out, maybe get someone to go through it in the yard first before you go out to the job, or send a different operator out. But in saying that, it's also good that he asked as well. Never be in the position where you get asked for something, you're not real sure, so you just try and wing it. All right, so it's always good to be able to ask as well. All right, and it turns out we didn't end up needing the fly anyway. We just set up in 2 different positions so it could reach what we needed to from those different places. Okay, so I think that's about enough for VOCs. I think we all get the idea. All right, my preference is always those in-house VOCs. Peer-to-peer is always going to be good, because you've got someone who's actually experienced in that machine going through with somebody who's new. Right? Now, the old tick and flick is never a good idea, because you don't know what that next job's going to be that they're going to go on with that machine. You want to make sure they do actually know how to operate that machine. All right, so that's about enough for VOCs. Any other questions out there that we have, or anything else we'd like to talk about? Alright, let me see what else do I have up here. Alright, so just looking at a couple of plans I have for videos coming up. So I do plan on doing one on reading plans, because I do know that's something that's not really covered enough in the courses, and some plans can be rather difficult to read if you're not exactly sure what you're looking at. Alright, so I'm going to do a video on reading the plans. I also want to look at doing a one on the different types of cranes, the advantages, disadvantages of the different types of cranes. So when we look at the different types of cranes, alright, so you got your vehicle loading cranes, or your high abs, etc. High abs, fascies, all the ones mounted on the back of a truck. From there, we'll work our way up through the classes. So you've got your CN, which covers things like your Franners, your TIDs, your Hummers, even covers things like your Wobblies, telehandlers that are over 3 tonne. Alright, after that we go to the C2, C6, C1, CO, so your slewing mobile cranes. Now with the slewing mobile cranes, there's a few different variations in them as well. So you've got your truck mounts. So when you look at your old Catos and Tadanos, newer versions might be the Zoomline or the XCMG have versions. So you've got your truck mounts, you've got your all-terrains, which is probably the most common one you're going to find now. Back when I first started, it was mostly your truck mounts, your old Catos and Tadanos. Nowadays, you typically got mostly all-terrains. If you're on site for a long time, rather than the all-terrain, they may put rough terrains in there as well. So rough terrains are always pretty easy to tell. They've got the 2 axles and big wheels will usually stand them out more than anything. Then you've got your crawlers. Well, you've actually got your all-terrain with a pin jib, or you could have a crawler with a pin jib. Alright, and from there you've got your tower cranes, so you've got your luffing tower cranes, you've got your hammerheads, and you've got your self-erectors as well. So there's a lot of different cranes, and we'll do videos specifically on that, talking about the advantages and disadvantages of each type, when you would use them, when you might not use them, alright, and which order you should actually get your licenses in. Okay, alright, so that's about enough for me rambling on. Does anyone out there have any questions they need answered? Anyone coming up to do any courses soon, or anything they'd like to learn about? Okay. So, anyone got any 4-day courses in the short week next week? Well, for those in the States with a short week, I know WA here doesn't have a short week. So over here in the eastern states, we've got the King's birthday on tomorrow. Alright. So typically you'll find over here they might do a lot of 4-day courses. So 4-day courses can include most of your cranes, could be your intermediate rigging, those sorts of things. Okay, so anyone got courses coming up? Yes, no? Okay. Alright, what else would you like to talk about out there then? Alright. No. All quiet out there at the moment. Where are we? Try and bring this up. Ah, yes, Shane. Actually, thanks for reminding me. What I needed to do was actually to find out how to get in contact with you. All right. If you could go onto my webpage onto the Facebook or one of those and send us a DM, all right, so I can get back to you. So I'd still love to catch up for a coffee and have a talk about that entertainment industry as well. All right. Now, it probably won't manage to do it until middle of July, because in a couple of weeks, well, I've only got really 1 day off between now and when I go away up to the Big Red Bash. So I'm going to be out of reach for a few weeks. Well, actually, what I am going to try and do on my trip is I've just organised the Starlink, so I'm going to try and have a show on the road as well. I will be going up with an old friend, a crane driver, and I'll see if I can't convince him, and we'll have a bit of a chat about how things have changed over time, seeing as he's an old fella. Right, so with any luck, I will be on next Sunday, but the following Sunday I will be on my way up to the Big Red. But with any luck, I will get that Starlink sorted out, and I'll be able to have a bit of a chat online, and if I can convince Ken to join us, we'll have a bit of a discussion about how things have changed in the industry over the years. Ken's actually just retired and he's just doing a lot of travelling now, so I'm going to take the advantage and spend the time going up there with him, and if we can, we'll just have a few beers on the road and have a chat. Okay. Yeah, so Shane, if you can go onto my Facebook page or one of the socials and leave a message, and I can get back to you so we can organise that bit of a catch-up. All right. I've actually been trying to do a bit more reading up on the entertainment rigging too, because it is one of those areas of rigging where I don't have a lot of experience, and the only experience I really do is when I've been sitting in the crane setting it up for them. All right, but it is a completely different field. Okay. All right. Anybody out there? Yeah. All right. So, anyone get up to anything exciting on the long weekend? I've just been out mowing lawns all day, so that was great. At least tomorrow I might get a little bit of time to kick back and relax before I get stuck into it again. All right. Yes, no. Okay. All right. So, does anyone else out there have any ideas on any upcoming videos you'd like to see as well? Right, particularly if you're going to be doing any courses, let us know what part of the course you might need a little bit of help with, and we can see what we can do. All right, I still want to do another one as well on different slinging techniques. I did get a lot of comments both ways on the video I did for slinging a stillage, and at the end of the day, look, some people are set in their ways and they don't like being done any other way, but you will find there is a lot more than one way to skin a cat. All right, so I did cover 3 different ways of slinging a stillage, but sometimes you get those people with anything outside of what they're used to, they don't like it. And look, that's one thing you are going to find in this industry as well. You do get some that have been around and they just like things being done their way. All right. Basically, look, if you're not from this industry, one thing you will learn, and look, it's something you will have to deal with, but unfortunately in this industry there is a lot of arrogance as well. You get a lot of people that think they know more than what they do. All right. Now, one of the things that really annoy me is, well, there's actually 2 things. One of them is when people say, oh, but that's the way we've always done it. Well, look, sometimes you just got to do a bit of research. Times do change, things change, safety changes. You need to be able to adapt and change with life as well. All right. And the other thing you've got to also remember is if you've been doing something the same way for 30 years, you don't really look at other ways to do it. But you might get a bloke that's just finished his course last week, and he comes out to site and he watches what you're doing and he sees something, thinks of a completely different idea. It doesn't mean he's wrong just because he's only just learned. He's looking at it with fresh eyes. It might actually be a lot better way of doing it. So it always pays to listen to everybody but use your experience to determine whether it's worthwhile to pursue or not. Okay, so Shane, do you have calcs video for pulleys, etc.? Well, if you're looking at pulleys, yes, for the basic rigging. So if you go to the course on the basic rigging course, the calculations for the basic rigging course, it covers the pulleys, etc. on the setup of a winch. Now, in that video, I do have 5 different formulas. So the first one is working out the minimum distance the lead sheave needs to be away from the pulley. From the winch. Then you've got to work out your becket load and your lead line. So those two work together. Because essentially you need to find out what your lead line is. But first, before you can do that, you need to find out the becket load in it. Alright. Now the next formula, the formula after that, is the formula on how to work out the minimum diameter rope to be used. Now, that formula has actually been taken out of the new assessment, so you don't actually need that one. You use the information from the lead line and then look at a chart for flexible steel wire to find out the minimum diameter. So that's one less you need to do. All right. Now, once you've done that, you need to work out what your head load is, and once you've worked out that, work out the load in the lead sheave, taking into account the angle factor that lead sheave is on as well. All right, but I'm glad you brought that up because it did bring up one thing. One of the most common mistakes I see is when people are working out the head load of a. So if you've got a chain block hanging up, all right, and you're using that chain block to lift, let's say, a 5-ton load, right? Now, most people would say, all right, well, we need at least a minimum 5-ton sling. All right. Now, if you're using a chain block to lift a 5-ton load, you've got a 5-ton dead load hanging off it. All right. Now, depending on the gearing of the chain block or the pulley system or whatever you're using, so you got that 5-ton dead load, but you could also be pulling another ton on the chain block to lift it up. So you actually need a minimum of 6 ton. So don't think about just the dead load, but also the load pulling as well, because you've got both those factors acting on that. All right, but I do look at it a lot on site, and on site you will see if they're lifting a dead load of 5 ton, then they think 5 ton is a minimum sling you need, but you may need something bigger, because you've got to take into account the forces acting on the pulling side of it as well. All right. So if you want to have a look at that side of things, pop over and watch the video on the basic rigging calculations, and that covers all the calculations you need for basic rigging, which the majority of is setting up of a winch and looking at the lead lines, your becket loads, talking about parts of line in the winch, etc. So that should cover off all that side of things. Now, when you are counting the sheaves, remember you've got to allow 5% friction for every sheave in the system. All right. Now, if you're working out your lead line, that incorporates every sheave that you use. All right. Okay. Uptimes. All right. G'day, mate, from the UK. Okay. I'm doing a crane manager test in 2 weeks. Can you please explain to me what the axle suspension does and when it's used and not used, etc.? Thanks. Okay, so your axle suspension. So your suspension in the cranes. Now, obviously, if you're driving a crane, it's just like your car. You've got your suspension, etc. Now, most cranes now are your all-terrains, which have a hydraulic suspension. So do most of your rough terrains, your fronters, etc. All right, just to make a drive on the road a lot easier. Now, the problem is if you are going to set up a crane and start lifting, you need your tyres off the ground. Now, if you're going to leave your suspension active, right, as you jack the crane up, your axle is just going to drop down and you're still going to have that bit of weight from the tyres on the ground, making you less stable. So essentially what you do is when the crane pulls up, you take your suspension all the way down, so you bleed all the hydraulic fluid out. It's just a simple button in the cab, or well, on a lever, you've got to use all 4 fingers on one and hand button. Right, but either all cranes are a little bit different, but you need to drop it down and then you lock your suspension so that when you jack up onto the outriggers, your wheels just don't come down and just keep sitting on the ground. All right. Now, that's what levers and groves, etc. are like. However, if you're in a Terex, Demag, Fawn, etc., they work a little bit differently, but they for the same reason. All right. So in those instances, you drive up, you put your outriggers down, you jack it up, and once it's jacked up, and then you suck your suspension up so your tyres are clear of the ground, and then you lock them out. All right. Now you've just got to remember that if you're driving with a load, that you make sure you keep your suspension locked. If your suspension's not locked while you're driving with a load, it will tend to start floating and it will push it all over one side and things will get pretty ugly pretty quick. All right, so if you've got any form of load while you're driving, whether it be all your counterweights on or if you've actually got a load while you're driving, make sure your suspension remains locked. All right, you only unlock it when you're going to actually start traveling on the road. Okay, I hope that helps. If you need anything else, just let us know. Okay, doing a sling in late June. I've done banksman with forklifts, articulated trolleys, lorries, flatbeds, etc. Want to step up. Well, good on you for stepping up, mate. So it's always good to learn as you go. Some of the terminology you use over there in the UK is a little bit different to over here. But the banksman, I think, is more relevant to what we call a dogman, and not what you call dogging over there in the UK. It's slightly different interpretations over here. Your slinger singler, I think, is more to do with rigging side of things. All right. Okay, exalted one, brilliant, fantastic answer. Appreciate it. All right, no worries at all. That's the whole point of being here, is to try and help you guys out a little bit. Okay, so, and Uptons, I wish you luck in your course and hope you do well. And it's good to see people getting into the industry, because I still reckon it's the best industry in construction. All right, not just in construction, but it's amazing how many different industries we actually do when we're working with cranes and rigging. So it can be construction, can be maintenance, can be doing all sorts of stuff. Theatre, another one. Yeah, I bet the safety rigs are different. Yeah, definitely. All right. Yes, I have a photo. I remember, I'll tell you this story. We had a guy, he was a compliance manager. Very quiet bloke, very keeps to himself. And we were looking at doing some more resources for the dogging. And where he was in the office, he had all the office girls sort of sitting alongside him and all, etc., etc. And I was up there talking to him and talking about some of the stuff relative to the dogging classes. So he went onto Google and he started looking up dogging, not thinking about what he was doing. And he got some, shall I say, awkward pictures up on the computer screen with all the ladies in the office, and he was a little bit embarrassed. So I think he was a little bit more precautious next time he started looking stuff up. But it was rather funny at the time, to be honest. Okay. There's power plant nuclear one being made in South England. They're looking for a sling singler. They have good money down there. All right. Yeah, well, I don't know what the money's like for over there in the UK. We actually do make rather good money here in Australia, working with cranes and rigging. Yeah, on the most part. Look, there's always going to be those smaller companies that, or some of the dodgy companies that don't want to try and do the right thing, but typically we do make good money here. And as for working on nuclear power, I actually wish they would do that over here, because to me it's a lot more viable than some of these systems and some of this work generation are bringing in. They really do need to look at nuclear power if they want to solve a lot of the problems we have. Okay. You're in your cable. Yeah, it's actually surprising. Look, it works a little bit to my advantage too. If I title any of my YouTube videos with the dogging in it, I seem to get a lot more on the search. So, don't know, there must be a lot of you blokes over there at Pommyland looking up dogging, because I always tend to get a lot more results on the search on my YouTube videos if I use the term dogging in there somewhere. Alright, but so, helps me out. I don't mind at all. Alright. Okay. So, I'm actually feeling like I'm in the UK at the moment. It's bloody freezing here at the moment. Alright, I think it's about 10 degrees at the moment. Some nights like this I really do miss being in places like Port Hedland and the Pilbara, where it's nice and warm all the time. Okay, but at least I got you guys to keep me company. Alright. Okay. Alright. But I can tell you I've had plenty of experience in dogging, just not the quite you're up to, Uptons. Okay. Yeah, I'd probably disagree with you there, with it being boiling in the UK. Where I typically spend most of my working life, the used to average between 35 and 40 degrees every day, which is a great day, I reckon. I reckon any day that's above 35, that's what I miss. Okay. 25 degrees. I do remember it used to maybe get down to 25 degrees if I was up there in Headland. That was on a cooler night. Yeah. Yeah, 25 degrees is still a little bit chilly. But it's all relative to what you're used to, I suppose. Okay. What time is it over there, actually? Because about 6:30 here. If memory serves me right, that would make it, what's that? About 8:30 in the morning over there. But I could be wrong. I have been once or twice before. Alright. Alright. So maybe you can tell me what your crane class is like over there. Because over here so our crane class is over here. So after our non-slew crane, we go from a C2, which is swing crane up to 20 tonne. Look, a lot of people don't do that one. They'll go straight to a C6, which is up to 60 tonne. Then you get your C1, which is up to 100 tonne. Then you get your CO, which is your open crane license, which basically any mobile crane over 100 tonne. All right. Tower cranes are separate on their own license. So tower crane license covers both your luffers and your hammerheads. And then you can also get your CS, which is a self-erector. So funny enough, a tower crane license doesn't cover a self-erector. Alright. Okay. I can't go to Australia, but I know loads of lads who went there to work, and New Zealand. Well, you'll probably find the money was a lot better here in Australia than it is in New Zealand. That's probably why a lot of New Zealanders actually do come to Australia to do a bit of work as well. Plus, the exchange rate sort of helps them on the way back as well. All right. And of course, we got better weather, about 35 degrees. Mobile and tower crane. Okay. Any different classifications between the two on your mobile cranes, or just one cover the lot? Actually seems to be a bit of a lag on the messages there, I reckon. And look, quite honestly, it's probably in my settings somewhere. I'm not exactly tech savvy. A lot of this I just try and figure out as I'm going along too. If you haven't already realised. Okay. Alright. Okay. Company who I'm doing the course with, I haven't seen any with tower cranes. Yeah, and look, it's probably the same problem over here as well. The big problem over here is a lack of providers for a lot of these courses as well. So, look, not every state's the same, obviously. Some states are going to be different, but you do get there's lots of capable trainers, but not so many RTOs that actually have the equipment to actually do the training with. All right. I do get a lot of questions of where can I go do this course, asking for my opinions. All right. Now, I sort of covered this a little bit last week too. Now, probably not so much for you guys in the UK, but what I do want to do is develop on my webpage a list of reputable providers, because we all know that not everyone's quite reputable. I'd never believe anyone that's going to do a tick and flick, all right, or anyone who's going to hold your hand and walk you through it. You do actually have to learn the stuff. It is pretty important that you do know it. So I want to try and develop a list of reputable RTOs that still help the students, not just say, there you go, you have to know this. Good trainers with industry experience that's going to help you and guide you through a course. Right, so I want to find at least a couple in each state, so that on my webpage I can just put the list there of reputable RTOs, because I do get these questions every week. I'm pretty sure I've got 5 or 6 of them this week again. Of where can I go do this course, or where can I go do that course? And look, I need to do a little bit of research myself, and I want to find out who these reputable ones are. So if you guys have any ideas of reputable ones in your area, if it's someone who's just going to give you the license, don't want to know them, they shouldn't be doing the training. If it's someone who actually helps you and guides you, they're the ones I want to find out about, so that I can then put them up on the webpage. And because I do get these questions constantly, so if I have that list there, people know where they can go. Might not necessarily be the cheapest RTO, but look, if you want the cheapest, it's probably not the best RTO, honestly. It's like most things, you do get what you pay for in a lot of instances too. If you're lucky enough in a lot of states, I'm not sure if they're all the same, but a lot of the states do have a lot of government funding as well. So if you're lucky, you can get on that side of things. So it does actually work out quite cheap. Okay, so what have we got here? Tower crane means, there's hardly any courses. Mobile crane course, yeah, but not tower crane. Yeah, and that's the problem there. So training companies don't make any money out of obviously buying cranes just for the training courses. So they tend to buy cheaper cranes or older cranes, and they're never going to have a great variety of them. All right, so it makes it very hard from a business point of view to go and buy a 130-ton crane to do an open crane license. So that's sort of what holds a lot of people back. I've seen companies that still using friction clutch cranes to do a open crane course, which is wrong, because you should be using something a little bit more realistic of what they're going to drive, not something they'll never see again. The problem with teaching someone something like a friction clutch is you're going to teach them bad habits on what not to do. I'd hate to see someone operate a normal crane like they do that, because things can get pretty ugly if they do. Okay. I was on site. The crane operators from South Africa moved here. Mobile cranes cost like 1 million. They can cost a lot more than that too. Alright, all depends on what size cranes you're talking about. I mean, obviously you're talking about pounds pounds. But if you're in something like a 500 ton Liebherr, it's going to cost a lot more than that too. A 60 ton Liebherr is probably going to, well, honestly I don't know what they would be now, but I'm going to guess they're going to be around the $1 million mark now. That's Aussie dollars, that is, so a little bit cheaper than the UK. So very expensive. It's not the kind of thing a training company would be able to afford just to deliver training. That's why you do find that a lot of the training companies will buy the Chinese cranes. So things like the Zoomlines or XCMGs or a very old crane. Now, look, given the preference of a Zoomline or a very old crane, look, I suppose it really depends on what condition the old crane's in. So the last company I actually worked for, they had a Zoomline to do it. Look, not the best crane in the world. It's not something I would ever take out on a job site, but it did what we needed to actually teach them how to drive the crane. Would have been much more preferable to actually have an all-terrain, because that's what's going to be a lot more common now. But in order to do the course, look, the training companies aren't going to be able to afford to buy the greatest and latest, right? So they will buy a cheaper brand or an older crane, right? You can't sort of have both unless the price of horses go up a lot. All right. Yeah. So, look, as I said, now I've said this previously, the time you actually spend in a crane in doing a course actually isn't long enough. None of these courses are. So, relative of what type of crane you used, you don't get enough time in it. And once again, it comes down to course costs. Look, I still prefer the way I did it, where back when I did it, we used to have to get the hours up, we'd log them, and once we got the hours logged, then we'd go and set the assessments. Unfortunately now, with all the, everyone's fear of getting prosecuted and all the rest of it, they won't allow you to do training on site, so it makes it very hard for someone to get a license unless they're in the industry. And even if they're in the crane industry, well, yes, they may be able to get the opportunity in a crane yard to have a bit of a play in a crane, but you can't do it out on site. And out on site's where you really want to be to learn how to do it. Okay. Told by a crane supervisor, costs $1,000 to rent out a crane for the day. Okay. Yeah, once again, I suppose it comes down to what crane you're hiring out for the day. So, smaller crane might be, actually £1,000 a day. What would that be? Let's say about $3,000. Yeah, I suppose it's all relative to the size. So if you were to get a smaller crane, it might be $250 an hour, with a minimum of 4 hours. So with the exchange rate, I suppose that's not too far off, but a big crane will cost you a lot more, especially when it takes a lot of trucks with counterweights and fly sections and whatever the case it may be. So it's all sort of relative to the size of crane you're doing as well. Okay. Yeah, you're right. Experience through hours is priceless, but unfortunately, look, what I found is most people coming in to do these courses now, they either want to start work in the industry, don't blame them, it's the best industry in construction, or they're working on a site, a project, where they've been talking to the crane crew and they want to get involved in it, or let's say they're rigging for the crane crew on site and they want to get their crane license. The problem is that site isn't going to allow them to get in that crane unless they've got their license already. Now, so it's a bit of a chicken before the egg. How do you get the hours in the crane if you're not allowed in the crane? Right, so unfortunately you've got to go do a short course that really doesn't cover enough on the practical side. Might cover off a lot of your theory. You still don't have enough time to cover off the theory you need either, for that matter. But you've got to go do that short course and then go back and spend some time in the crane. And this is where it comes into a problem, right back to where we started from. A lot of these companies won't allow you into a crane unless you've got a VOC for that crane. Now, how to get verified as competent in a crane unless you've had training in that crane? So it's all a catch-22. Ideally, they should be allowed to train on site with a licensed operator. Now, and look, as far as the regulations go, you can still do that. If you are enrolled in a course, so you can enroll in a crane course, then you can go to work and you can spend some time in the seat with a licensed person actually watching you. That licensed person can't be dogging for the crane, he can't be rigging for the crane. His sole job is just to watch, supervise and train you. Right, so you can actually still do that legally. It's just a lot of sites won't allow it on their sites. Okay. Okay, so I thought you won't be if site's busy because steel fixers need the crane to put in beams. Yeah, funny enough, I've been working with some steel erectors the last couple of weeks. It's all about tonnage. Got to get those beams up there. All right. Yep. Okay, the course I'm in is 5 days, 2 in class, 3 days practical, test day on the 5th day. Yeah. So, look, typically the way the courses are over here for a rigging course is you've essentially got a couple of days in the, well, let's say a day and a half in the classroom, day and a half doing practical, then you have a day doing the practical assessments and a day doing the theory and the calculations assessments. So look, it's nowhere near enough time. So I'll give you an example. So let's talk about our basic rigging course. So on the practical alone in the basic rigging, okay, you've got to learn to tie the knots. You need to set up a winch. You need to erect and dismantle a materials hoist. You need to place concrete panels. You need to install a CCLP or a cantilevered crane loading platform. You need to install and remove a safety shutter. You need to erect and dismantle a steel structure. That's just on the practical side. All right. Then on the theory side, there's about 70 odd questions you need to cover, and which you need to get a 95% pass mark in, all closed book. And then you also have, off the top of my head, I think it is half a dozen calculations that must be 100%. All right, so it's actually quite a bit of information you need to get through in a very short period of time. All right, especially if you don't have any sort of experience in the industry. And I also think one of the hardest parts, especially if you're not from industry and you're just doing the courses, one of the actual hardest parts most people find is trying to understand some of the terminology that's being used, especially when you're talking about basic rigging, because you start talking about all different pieces of equipment, and sometimes a lot of people have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. So simple things like a cantilevered crane loading platform, commonly known here in Victoria as a Preston bin. All right. It's just little things that one that always makes me laugh is even if I'm just talking about a sheave, and look, and that's the hard part as some come from industry and trying to train it. You don't realise what they don't know because it's just second nature to you. The amount of times I've started talking about sheaves, just expecting everyone knows what a sheave is, right? Apparently not. So a lot of times the problem can be actually learning the different terminology. So if there's any views on here from Australia, not necessarily, I don't know how they do things in the UK. I'd actually like to look into that to see how your courses do run. And I'm actually interested in looking at some of your crane supervisors course as well to see how they're done as well. Wouldn't mind seeing if I sort of do that online type thing. But yeah, if you're in Australia and you are doing some of these courses, I'd strongly advise watch the video on some of the terminology as well, because that is, look, people always think about the knots and the calculations and all those sorts of things, but just simple things like the terminology can really screw with your head because people are afraid to put their hand up, and you're there talking away and you're talking away and you see the blank stares on their faces and you start realising, well, they don't actually know what I'm talking about. If you are in a class, never be afraid to stick your hand up and ask a question, all right? No such thing as a silly question, but it's pretty silly if you don't actually put your hand up and actually ask as well. Okay, so I hope that makes sense to you. Okay, how are we looking? All right. Okay. Alright, you understood the maths? Well, I'm glad you understood it. I have been told at times I do tend to get through the maths a little bit too quick, and I need to take a look and see if I need to slow it down a little bit. One of the reasons I think I do the maths a bit too quick is because it's one of those things, it's very easy for me to understand because I'm pretty sort of used to doing it and I don't give it a lot of thought. So I don't always think that not everyone's actually keeping up. But the maths, look, one thing I do like telling my students, look, common thing I'll always do at the start of a course is I'll say, all right, who doesn't know how to do maths? And guaranteed somebody will always put their hand up. And I'll tell them, that's right, you can relax, there is no maths involved. And then they got this big sigh of relief. Because realistically, when you think about it, it's actually nothing to do with maths. We'll take the basic rigging for example again. All right, so there is only, now there's only 4 formulas. Now, if you remember the formula, then all you need to do is write the numbers underneath it, jump on a calculator, and come up with an answer. It's nothing to do with maths, just remember the formulas. And I'd advise if you are doing these courses and you are struggling with some of these calculations, watch the video, write each of the formulas down in order. It's very important you get them in order, but write them down in order and then write them down in order 50 times, 100 times until you know what the formulas are and what order they go in. Once you've got that, then it's just write the numbers underneath, jump on a calculator, come up with an answer. All right. So with the calculations, don't overthink it. There's nothing actually that hard in it. It's just a bunch of formulas. Get to know the formulas. Never be scared of calculations because it is actually pretty easy. All right. Yeah, and as Upton's just said, never be afraid to ask. All right. Remember, you can actually be paying a lot of money to do some of these courses. So you want to make sure you get the best value out of it. And how you get the best value is by actually asking questions and making sure you understand it. What you've got to remember, it's a very high risk industry. So you actually need to make sure you do actually understand everything that's going on. Now, the one advantage you've got if you've done a previous course, so if you're just getting into the dogging and rigging, but you've done a forklift or a boom lift or something along those previously, A lot of your questions at the start of it are going to be very much the same. So you're pretty much always going to cover the questions on what's a hazard, what's a risk, name some hazards, name some controls, who you're going to talk to about hazards, all those sorts of questions you're going to find throughout all of the assessments you do. So if you already know the answers, and this is a good hint, especially when you're studying, don't waste time studying questions you already know the answer to. If you know the answer to them, focus on the ones you don't know. Okay, so I always advise students the best way to actually study is if you have somebody that can at home who can ask you the questions and then highlight all the ones you get wrong. They're the ones you need to focus on. You don't need to focus on ones you've got right, you already know them. Focus on the ones you got wrong. All right. Once you get them, go through them again, see if you get any others wrong. All right. That's the best way to do it, is by doing it verbally. And if you're doing it with a partner, it's always good to get them asking the questions because they love stirring you when you get it wrong, and that way you'll make sure you don't get it wrong again. Okay, signals, etc. All right. So yeah, signals are another one that people do struggle with. Look, whichever course you're doing, if you've already done dogging and learnt your hand and whistle and two-way signals, make sure you refresh on them again before you go back to basic or intermediate or cranes. All right, the amount of people that come into a crane course that don't know their whistle signals, and look, a lot of that is, and I totally disagree with it, is those that come into a crane course that don't have a dogging license. Should be mandatory to have a dogging license first, and if you do, it will actually make a crane course a lot easier, but you do actually need to know all of your hand, whistle and two-way radio signals. All right, so if you're going to do any courses, jump on my webpage, check out the calculations for whatever course you're doing, whether it be dogging, rigging, any of the crane courses. Go through all those. Now, I do think the calculations in cranes are very important because a lot of them are talking about load charts. And if you don't know how to read a load chart, you probably shouldn't be in the crane. All right. Load charts are like the crane operator's Bible. You really do need to have them there. All right. So each course, they all have calculations. So watch the calculations on those courses. All right. Dogging, basic rigging, knots. A lot of people struggle on knots, so get to know your knots. All right. Now, the good thing about knots is, unlike a lot of the other stuff, I find with the knots, once you know them, they're very hard to forget. All right. And particularly the ones you do in dogging are the ones you're always going to be using. So your clove hitch and your bow line, they're your two basic knots that you're always typically going to use to attach your tag line. All right. So it's always good to know them. All right. Okay. So when I see people try and do banksman, they don't know the signals, no loads, boom in, boom out, down, stop, start. Yeah, and look, now, particularly with boom in and boom out, and if you watch my one on the hand signals, there are a few different versions that you can do for some of these signals. Look, there's ones I prefer, there's ones that are sort of the standard that you see in all the charts that nobody actually uses. There are some different versions. When you're out on site now, and remember if you're doing boom in and out, you're typically working with a Frenner or a mobile crane because a oil can won't typically boom in and out with a load. But talk to your operator, see what he prefers, see what you prefer, talk to each other before you start, make sure you understand each other and you know what you're doing. Now typically, like I said, there are a few different versions of some of these hand signals, but if the operator's worth his salt, he's been around any sort of time at all, he should know all the different variations anyway. The only problem I do find is with the one that's taught quite often for boom in and out, is a lot of people tend to get them backwards, which is why I try and avoid using it. All right, so I don't know. So normally let's go to the slide here. So that there, that is actually boom out. So I'm the rigger, boom out to me. Now, that's, a lot of people tend to get it wrong and they think, oh, that's boom into the crane. No, that's boom out. That one is boom in. All right, so boom in, back to you. All right, now, that's just one example. All right, so there's a few different variations of that. So look, it depends where you work, what you're sort of used to. So another one people use quite often, so, well, where are we? So boom out or boom in is another one. Now the problem with that is if you're trying to put a motor down onto some studs, bit hard to take your hands off the load to then give a hand signal because it's not really going to go down on the studs too well. So a lot of people will use boom out and boom in. But once again, they've all got their ups and downs. So the problem with that one is, especially if you're wearing black gloves and you're trying to do that, it can be a little bit harder to see as well. Now, as I said, when you're doing that hand signal, you're typically working with a Frenner or a Hummer or something like that. It's also very easy to just go boom it out and boom it in. All right, just with those two fingers. If you do it with a whole hand, you may start driving towards you. So that one tends to work pretty well as well. And it's easy to see. All right, so that's one I typically prefer to use at times as well. Although, because I do know most people will go boom out and boom in, I will typically use that quite often as well. Okay, 2 thumbs inwards, boom in, and 2, yeah, so boom out, boom in. Right, yeah, so they do, like I said, that is a quite common one, especially for those new and not used to it, because it's an easy one to see, it's an easy one to do. But like I said, especially if you're working, say, for maintenance, or you're trying to put a pipe spool in or something along those lines, or you've got a podgy in your hand trying to line something up, it's a bit hard to then pull it out and give the hand signal because you've just lost what you're trying to do. So it's always best if you can give a signal with one hand so that you can actually keep one on the load, try and keep that in place as well. All right. But like I said, different people, at the end of the day, what it all boils down to is that you and the operator actually understand each other. Because look, quite often one of the most common signals is the old nod, especially when you've got two hands on a load and you want him to come down and you give him a nod and he comes down, or give him a nod and he can go up. It's about having that communications and getting to know each other. All right. That's what it all boils down to. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what the signal is, as long as you understand each other. And if you're lucky enough to work with in the same crew, you get to know each other and you know what each other want as well. So look, ideally it is always best if you get to work with the same people all the time. But in saying that, look, it's also good to learn how other people do things as well. So I suppose there's advantages and disadvantages to both. Okay, all right. So, yep, and definitely communication is definitely the key. That pretty much sums it up in those couple of words there. It doesn't, not just about the lifting, but the whole planning, everything. It's all about talking to each other. Right? In the classroom, out in the field, just turning up to a job. Always talk to each other, talk to everyone around you, get different opinions, listen, and then use your experience to decide. All right. Well, I think we're going to call it a night there. So I hope the rest of you enjoy the rest of your long weekend if you're in one of the states lucky enough to have one for the King's birthday. For those that have got to work tomorrow, have fun. All right, and I will see you all in the next video. And thanks for listening.